All right, we are ready to resume part two of today's roundtable. And just to sort of set the context, in this session, what we want to do is look at the role of tax professionals in tax crimes, but tax crimes then connected to other criminal offenses as well. And some of this came up a little bit in our earlier discussion, but specifically we'll be looking at tax crimes and money laundering, tax crimes and corruption, and then tax crimes and organized crime. So we'll try to keep into sort of three separate buckets. Will go in order. Obviously, they sometimes come together, but hopefully by looking at them a little bit in an individual lens, we'll see particular issues and concerns with respect to the role of tax professionals. And really at this point, I think we're getting to the sort of darkest side of these professional activities. Once we're seeing the tax crimes and the activities of professionals also linked with money laundering, corruption, organized crime, we've really moved into a further space of concern from a policy and enforcement perspective. So to get us started, I thought we will begin with money laundering and tax crimes, and ask the starting point question of how do professionals, in particular those connected to the tax area, but also a little bit more broadly, become involved in money laundering in conjunction with criminal tax schemes. So where do we see that sort of link, that kind of involvement? And if you might have some cases that you might think of to illustrate that. So Hassan, start with you.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, talking about how professionals get involved, knowingly or unknowingly, and work as enablers in tax dodging and other predicate offenses, I refer to the one Malaysian development bond scandal, which is also known as 1MDB scandal. If we deep dive into that case, we can see how millions of dollars were embezzled from syndicate financing. The purpose of those loans was falsified through the help of insiders who were mainly some overambitious bank officials. Then those funds were funneled through chain of shell companies, which were created by gatekeepers like lawyers, accountants, and those gatekeepers were involved throughout the process. Not only that, some greedy bankers helped in arranging and underwriting the bonds, charging well above the market rate. Tax implications were there too in each stage. Were those taxes paid to appropriate authorities? I don't think so. Actually, the scandal itself and the verdicts tell different stories. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you. Rudolph, I thought you had your hand up earlier. I didn't know if you had. Okay. So I will go on to Enrique.
Okay. Whenever we have the same structures that are used to do tax evasion can do money laundering. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's like people that do smuggling and then start to do international trafficking of drugs. You know, the job is the same. You just have to do a little something here and there, and so anyone that can do or will do tax evasion will also do money laundering.
Simon.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. But I'd go one step further, actually. So I would suggest that almost all tax evasion involves money laundering, because it's a financial crime and it involves the movement of money and the hiding of money. And in most countries, that will fit the definition of money laundering. And in fact, although I've never done any research on this, and it might be interesting if one of the academics here was to think about it at some point, what do we think is the most significant predicate offence globally for money laundering? It may well be tax evasion. The amounts involved are huge. The sophistication of the methods used, are at the more extreme end. And you may well find it's drugs, but tax isn't going to be far behind, and it may well be at the top. And I don't think that gets appreciated or talked about very, very much at all. It tends to be separate. Tax is the job of the tax administration. Money laundering is the job of the police. But I equally agree with the other comments that it's very similar techniques, and you will get professionals helping tax criminals, go way beyond the basics of tax evasion, disguising the crime, hiding the proceeds, using very sophisticated offshore structures, shell companies, all that sort of stuff to help move money around. The flip side of this is where you have a situation where the tax administration is able to use proceeds of Crime Act powers, as many are, it's a really powerful weapon. So in addition to tax assessments, civil sanctions, criminal sanctions, you can also use all the freezing, seizing, all those sort of powers that come with proceeds of crime. It's a really powerful tool in the armory of a tax administration to be dealing with this. But I think this is an understood and under-researched area.
Thank you, Simon. I will take that to my research agenda. Vasilios.
Yes, that's true. Perhaps one of the most important predicate offences is to money laundering is tax evasion, in general, tax offences. The thing is that also according to the academic position and also the position of the jurisprudence in Greece, these two have to be distinguished, these two actions. So that's generally the problem when many times prosecutors in Greece also say that we have a tax evasion and at the same time money laundering, and as money laundering they just describe the non-payment of the money that should have been paid to the Greek state. And this is something like as automatically incorporating this kind of money to their own assets. So I think it should be a further action. It's something that has to distinguish money laundering from the tax evasion. And the interrelation of the tax crimes and money laundering, I just share an example of the real estate market in Greece. This used to be the case where we have an objective price, the so-called objective price of the real estate, and the taxes, the sales taxes, based on the selling and purchasing of an apartment, for example, it is calculated upon this objective price. And mainly all contracts were taken place in this objective price, whereas the real price, the commercial price, used to be much higher. So this was a way just to make a tax evasion. Nowadays, we have, after the financial crisis in Greece that resulted in this bank run and in the loss of trust of the banks and so on, there is a huge volume of cash general circulating in Greece, and there is the so-called the tax evasion of the small man that, for example, a plumber or I don't know, a lawyer perhaps also, who just is paid in cash. We have seen nowadays in real estate purchases that the real price, the commercial price, and even higher than the commercial price is mentioned in the contracts. And so it's exactly the opposite now. This is a kind of money laundering. For example, you have already gained money, which you cannot circulate in the financial system. And this is a way now. There has been a study that showed that it was circulated in the Greek newspapers. I haven't seen the study yet, saying that there have been purchases of apartments in very, very high prices. So this is a way now, the opposite, paying some taxes to the Greek state, more than they should have paid according to this financial transaction of purchasing of an apartment, but at the same time legalizing assets that have been a result of tax evasion of all previous years.
Thank you. Mate.
Thank you. I also wanted to say that sanctions evasion, thanks to the genocidal invasion of Ukraine and the general craziness of Putin and all the other people that are becoming sanctioned, the sanctions list, the lists of sanctioned entities are growing every day, every week now, and so sanctions evasion is becoming a huge area of interest, and these things go hand in hand with money laundering, with tax evasion, and you find one and you're pretty likely to find the other two hand in hand. And I just wanted to mention one really exciting thing that I've been working on that has been in the media a little bit in the last couple of months, where a prominent businessman, a Russian businessman who is under sanctions, has been involved in a court trial in the UK, and his underling in the UK, his right-hand man in the UK, so to speak, has been caught up in this case, and there were a lot of frozen accounts, lots of back and forth with the National Crime Agency over potential confiscation and so forth. But the point I'd like to make is that an investigation for suspected sanctions violations was started, and then the NCA had to notify HMRC because they found a load of money, tens of thousands of pounds in cash and accounts, and all sorts of forms of money that they found that it turns out HMRC should have known about, but they didn't. And so it just happens this way. So the people who are prone to falling foul of sanctions, they turn out to be prone of falling foul of tax as well. So because we're now in the business of tracking sanctions violations, I suppose this is going to lead us to discovering loads and loads of undeclared income and tax violations as well.
Thank you. Bert?
Yeah, I think the outcome of money laundering and tax evasion is to hide the profits of crime. And if you think about the job of tax authorities, I think they are too limited in many countries in terms of identifying risk indicators that are relevant for identifying money laundering, for instance. Similar for customs, for instance. We know there's lots of trade-based money laundering happening. Customs fraud is also a big spinner for illegal profits for many entities. So the lack of awareness of tax investigators, auditors about other crimes that are interrelated to tax evasion is a bit of a problem for many authorities, because if they do not establish things like interagency working groups or task teams, they are usually not in a position to address these crimes to the full extent of the law as they should. Thank you.
Thank you. Rudolph?
I think on the money laundering issue, this is a very difficult crime to prove that it is a crime, because you have to connect the drug money to the money in the bank or to the cash they have, and that connection is very hard to make. I'm very interested about prosecutors or judges here who talk about this issue, because that's, in my view, what I've learned. In Switzerland, we just don't have nearly any money laundering cases because it's simply not possible to connect these two crimes. Yeah.
Thank you. Calahero?
Yes, I think that just linked to what just Rudolf said, there is a very interesting definition of laundering that is like a beautiful cathedral where rarely you celebrate a mass. In fact, if you see the case law in all countries about money laundering, you find very few decisions concerning money laundering, few decisions of conviction due to the difficulties to link directly the laundering of money, of the profit of the crime, to the next step, how and where the money is cleaned, is laundered. So how we deal with this? Even if we have a great instrument, because we have, I think that the tools to fight against money laundering are very, there are many countries. We have international convention, we have specialized teams, we have a lot of crimes. I think that only in Italy we have at least 4 or 5 crimes that are related to money laundering, including the self-money laundering that was introduced a few years ago. Nevertheless, very rarely still now we have a conviction and or / investigation for money laundering. So I think that the tax crime is a good start for investigate on money laundering, because as the colleague said, as Simon said at the beginning, most of the time the predicate offense in the money laundering is a tax crime when we talk about big amount of money. How we deal with this? First, using the instruments that we use to fight against organized crime. We have to consider the money laundering like a typical expression of organized criminal group. We have to investigate and prosecute it using the same instruments. Like, I don't want to repeat, I look a bit boring about that, but you need interceptions, you need the video surveillance, you need international cooperation, you need to include other agencies, not only police, but also, for example, the FIU, the Financial Investigation Unit, to analyze the suspicion report and to deepen the elements that come from this information. From then, you need international cooperation. International cooperation, especially with those countries where it's very easy to hide this money. So we have to push on this to foster this kind of international cooperation, and only this would be the very effective way to fight against money laundering and to recover the real profit of the crime.
Thank you. Roel?
Yes, we in the Netherlands also were very, let's say, we're facing a lot of problems in prosecuting money laundering because of the evidence you need for the predicate crime. And we fought very hard in the Netherlands to convince the Supreme Court that they should change the system. And we were happy that they changed the system, I think now for 10, 12 years ago, when, let's say, they found enough, the Supreme Court, that if we can prove that there are very serious allegations of suspicions of money laundering, then we may ask the suspect to give an explanation where the origin, where the money comes from, or where the assets are coming from. And only if the suspect is willing to give an explanation, then we need to investigate that explanation. But if the suspect doesn't give an explanation, then we, let's say, met our burden of proof. And then the conclusion of the judge is that there is no reason to think that the money comes from a legal origin, and therefore this is money laundering. So if I know there are quite some systems, like Rudolf said, in Switzerland, where the prosecutor needs to prove the predicate crime. We are happy that we are not in that difficult position anymore. So judges are able to help us a little bit, but, well, you have to convince them.
Thank you. Thea?
Yes, I agree with everyone that tax evasion is a most predicate offense of money laundering. However, I think that my country and probably I think that most colleagues will agree with me when I say that cryptocurrencies today are a big problem for money laundering, because even though we have specialized police and even prosecutors, the judges are not aware, and even some prosecutors are not aware of what cryptocurrencies are. And I think that every country is facing difficulties with cryptocurrencies, because the transferring of the same is very fast and is almost impossible to detect. So I think that the judges and prosecutors, also the police, should have a lot of seminars and a lot of education about today cryptocurrencies and how it's affecting the tax evasions crime, also money laundering crime.
And yes, Tay, I want to sort of follow up on that, because certainly from just a purely tax side, there's been significant difficulty in thinking through what to do with respect to cryptocurrency, how to ensure compliance just from a tax system perspective, and you layer that on with being, a mechanism for financial flows that pose new challenges for sort of the money laundering side. Really quite interesting. Emanuele. Muted? Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry. I think just to add on to the discussion, I think organized crime groups make it a point to not only evade and launder money, but also to evade jurisdictions. In the investigation that we did for Al Jazeera on this individual who's clearly from Calabria and who's allegedly associated with the 'Ndrangheta, so it's one of the strongest and biggest organized crime groups, they make it a point that the money does not have to return to Italy, is not managed through Italian channels, because they don't want that money to be the object of Italian jurisdiction. Hence why all their efforts are focused in making sure that they set up a system which allows them to move that money potentially through European banking institutions, because they mentioned Deutsche Bank on several occasions. But the focus is on to make sure that the money does not reach Italian shores, and if it does, it happens in such a way that it's it's just the peanuts. It's just so little, but the bulk of it does not reach the jurisdiction. Hence why I think it's very interesting to focus on the instruments that every jurisdiction has. But I mean, at the end of the day, these people are going to make sure that that money does not return here, does not come where it's actually potentially being attacked by authorities.
Thank you. And it's very interesting to sort of think about money laundering and then reaching into some additional issues. I will just remind everybody, we're definitely going to focus also exclusively on organized crime for the last part of our second half discussion here. And I think it's interesting because I think there's some important potential differences. I know we had just had a suggestion about the potential or possibility of using perhaps more intrusive investigative techniques, like ones we used in organized crime to fight money laundering plus tax crime. And I think an interesting question is, once you put organized crime to the side, where there are often very specialized rules and jurisdictions as well as approaches, when we're looking at just cases of money laundering and tax crime, would we in fact find it to be either, legally possible, politically practicable, or in terms of resources, realistic to imagine sort of extensive, intrusive investigative techniques when it's, and I use the words loosely, just money laundering and tax crimes. But Enrique, I'd like to turn to you.
I would just like to make some comments on everything that was said. In my opinion, the connections between tax crime and other crimes are a little bit actually overlooked, but the Tax and Crime Academy inside the OECD does a great job. I have done two or three courses there, and they are really, really good. And they have a lot of papers and publications about those subjects. So I recommend highly that everyone read what they have there. And in my opinion, we should focus more in unexplained wealth orders that the UK have, more itself than money laundering. I think maybe the unexplained wealthy orders are easier and expedier and a better instrument in the confiscation of those monies that came from wrongdoing. And about the interpretation that Rael just said it, I would like to point out to the case of Murray versus United Kingdom in the European Court of Human Rights, and how the European Court said that you can actually oblige the defendant to state clearly where those monies came from, what is your explanation, and if you don't have a good explanation, we can make a conclusion that the money actually came from crime, and then therefore there is money laundering in those cases.
Thank you. Sergio.
Maybe Thea was first.
I thought that was from up before. Do you have Taya, did you want to comment again?
Yes, I wanted to
Oh,
comment.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry,
for
it's
catching
okay.
that.
I wanted to follow up when Emmanuel said about Mafia Ndrangheta in Italy, that I had an interesting case regarding the same mafia, where I was executing European investigation order, firstly, to find out the bank accounts in Croatia related to the mafia. And after that, we, from court in Milano, received order of freezing. And after that, it was a seizure. And it was all related to tax evasion crimes and money laundering crimes. But the difficulty of executing the order of freezing and seizure, and prior the European investigation order, was we had very slow information. We had to take a lot of steps to receive a lot of information. And when we received everything, it turned out that there was totally of 14 million euros in account in Europe, in Croatia, and safe with golden bars, diamonds, and everything. And when I was writing a proposal for the judge, because the judge must give an order to freeze and seize property in Croatia, the judges were appalled. They did not know what regulations this was based upon. I had to explain them everything. It was really difficult because the judges were not familiar with everything as the prosecutor and police was.
Thank you. Sergio.
Thank you. I just want to say what is an important distinction that I think we have to have clear in mind, talking about the relation between money laundering and tax evasion, depending on the nature of the proceeds of the crime, because we are used to deal with cash, with luxury watches or jewels that are still proceeds of tax offenses. There are goods that we find during the house searches and inspections, hidden in some roof or somewhere, packed in vacuum, the cash. This aside that is a kind of traditional money laundering that is always happened, and we are used to deal with in the smuggling with Switzerland and so on. In this side of money laundering, I don't see a big involvement of tax professionals, for instance. On the other hand, we have the other kind of proceeds of crime that can be defined as a tax saving. Simply, tax saving is the proceeds of the tax evasion. So, am I supposed to tailor to define a money laundering starting from a tax evasion? In these cases, the businessmen, the taxpayers, used to use the profits, the assets. Tax saving is still an asset of the company, of the businessman. So he go ahead in doing business using these proceeds of crime. Am I allowed to see a money laundering there? My answer is yes, and we are trying to push also our courts in this direction, also to have some tools to recover assets from companies. There is then the last side, the last kind of money laundering, which is the most dangerous in my view, which is the simply wire transfers throughout Europe and throughout the world. And here I come to Emanuele's point when he said we have to be speeder, faster than perpetrators, and it's very hard for us to move forward when we see the first wire transfer from Italy to Bulgaria and then to other jurisdictions. But we have the tools. We actually have the tools. We have the international conventions for judiciaries and for investigative purpose, which means that we at first can get the information on the final destination of the wire transfer, and then we can try to recover it. We are experiencing many investigations trying to recover money that went to China or to Singapore, and it's hard, but it's not impossible. It's harder when wire transfers go to Emirates. There is kind of black hole for us, and we have sometimes some kind of conventions, but it's really, really hard to recover something.
Thank you. Calahero.
Yes, just a few remarks about what you said, the difficulties to use more intrusive tools of investigation, of prosecution, when you deal with money laundering concerning tax crime or concerning organized crime. I think this is the main issue, about, as you said. So I have my experience here in Italy. As I told you, I come from Palermo, where there is a very strong organized crime. It's famous for this, we have to say, also for the good weather, the pizza and so on, but the good food, but for other things more. So the problem is when you deal with an organized crime case related to money laundering, you have another regime that you can apply. You have a lower standard of proof, for example, to get an interception by the judge, but also to get an international cooperation on this. I have a lot of experience when I have an organized crime case and money laundering. If I request an interception abroad, for example, in execution of a European investigative order or regulatory commission, I got a positive result. If usually if I did the same for a simple money laundering related to tax crime or common crime, it's much more difficult. So this is one of the main issues. We have to convince the political system, the legal system, that many times money laundering, tax crime, even if not immediately, but there can be a signal of a more serious crime, more dangerous crime, or that they are as well dangerous like organized crime cases. So we don't have to underestimate the negative effect of a money laundering that comes from a different kind of crime. It is not an organized crime case. So for this, of course, you need also to, for example, inside the European Union, you need an harmonization of the legislation, not only the substantial legislation, because of course all the money laundering are almost the same, but also of the procedural issue, of the investigative issues, and also of the prosecutor power.
Thank you. Mate?
Thank you. Regarding this question of organized crime, I wanted to actually ask a question more than make or give any insight, because we have so many prosecutors here. I'd like to take advantage as a reporter, and I know that organized criminals, organized crime gangs in Europe have a really good time with VAT fraud, and you know, they're very good at it. They make tens of millions from it. Occasionally they go to prison, but there are billions and billions to be made by organized crime gangs from VAT fraud. And I know EPPO, the newly created European Public Prosecutor's Office, is working hard to stop this. But you know, if any of the prosecutors could give us a couple of war stories regarding this VAT fraud, because you know, I'm trying to get into covering this stuff a little bit more. So I'd love to hear about it. Thank you.
Enabled to have
So-
a lot of
Oh, I think somebody, so I was going to actually say, why don't I take that as a moment for our prosecutors to sort of think about what they'd like to add, and we'll hit that in the last part as we talk more completely about organized crime, because then we can fit that conversation all in one space and get all the elements. So great, Mate, to get them started thinking about that, and they got a little time to percolate. We only have a few minutes really left for money laundering and tax alone, right? And I just wanted to sort of hit two different points. And the first is to go back and look inside the actual transactions that are supporting the money laundering and tax crimes, and ask, you know, a couple of interconnected questions, and you can touch upon any of them. First is sort of, what are the kinds of schemes or methods that are used by professionals when they're engaging in money laundering in connection with tax crime? So what is it they're actually doing? What is it that we're seeing there? And then next and related, as the professionals are engaging in money laundering in connection with tax offenses, what is their sort of the dynamics in their professional networks? And I'm thinking about their roles with other colleagues, with the clients, with financial institutions, with an eye to, are they using increased secrecy as they're trying to pursue money laundering and tax crime? Are they compartmentalizing as a way to make this happen? Do they have to expand their networks and bring more players in than they usually do? Sort of, what are you seeing as you are seeing money laundering and tax crime being brought together? Simon?
Yeah, so I think that's quite a difficult question, Diane, particularly outside the organised crime side, which I think is quite different, and we'll come on to that. But in this sort of non-organised bit, that, you know, the two go so much hand in hand that it's almost the same things that they're doing, really: the creation of the offshore structures and the movement of money, etc. If you're talking about money laundering just more generally to support tax crimes of any nature, including organized crime, then in terms of the techniques they might use, it's almost anything. You know, now whether it's offshore structures, whether it's using crypto assets of some description, whether it's some sort of trade-based money laundering, so you're moving value by over or underpricing commodities or intangibles or whatever, you know, whether it's cash, literally moving bags of cash around, whether it's funneling things through the banking system. It's all of those, and often in the biggest and most sophisticated, it's a lot of them come together in the one scheme. It's not just one thing. It's it's not just this is cash based, this is trade based, this is whatever. So it'll be everything that they can harness really to disguise the money. But say in the non-organized side, I think a lot of it just goes along with the tax evasion. It's the same techniques.
Thank you, Simon. I want to actually pick up on something that you mentioned there, which was banks, because in some sense that can be different than just tax crimes alone. And maybe just ask the question, sort of, what are we seeing in the banking and financial side, the banking sector, that's perhaps contributing to the ability to engage in money laundering? Is it complexity of the financial system? Is it the transnational flow of monies? The fact that we have very large sort of multi-layered participants that make it sort of hard to see what's going on. Sort of what about the suspicious activity reports? Or, do we really see the number of those that we should expect given what's perhaps going on? So if you have any thoughts about sort of bringing the banking side into this.
Yeah, I think you're on mute, Simon.
Enrique, sorry about that.
Okay,
Sorry.
I don't really see the banks being complicit in tax evasion and money laundering, at least here in Brazil. We have really 4 big banks, and practically all of financial transactions run through those 4 banks. And they pretty much help us in our investigations. The thing that happens from time to time, and it's really nerve-wracking, is the amount of time that the banks take to send you the financial sheets, the cheques, the photocopies of everything, and from time to time you have to wait 1 year to get the whole picture, and that for just the first layer of bank information. Usually you do 3, 4, 5 different layers of bank information in order to actually know what's happening. And but that said, the banks usually report everything to the FIUs. Things really, at least in Brazil, things really happen. Of course, you have some rogue banks. We had here 1 or 2 or 3 different cases with those rogue banks, and that is the case that we really suffer, because if something really wrong is being made through a bank like that, it usually takes 20 years until everyone understands that this bank is a part of a criminal organization and has to go down, just like everyone else that is involved in the investigation. And normally the banks have a credible position that they are not helping everyone. And so it takes a lot of time to it's like HSBC in the United States with the cartels. It takes time to convince everyone that the bank is not doing really the job that it should be done.
Thank you. Vasilios.
Yes, I also agree with Enrique, and I just wanted to add a general problem in relation with the banks. I think that the first and main way of a principal way of money laundering is the trade-based money laundering. And the trade-based money laundering is when a transaction, for example, is financed, and this has a particular relation to the maritime sector, especially. That's why I have some experience about that in Greece. A bank finances a transaction, whereas there is no access of the bank to the real products that are being transferred, are being shipped. And this is a way, so to say, to facilitate money laundering scheme. And this is the problem of the banks, of this kind of banks, who actually just send, one company sends money to the other company, and they can't check, the banks can't check the core of the transaction, what is being shipped. They only check documents. So this is perhaps also something that can imply in tax evasion as well.
Thank you.
Wanted
Jim
to
Franco.
add, from Italian point of view, I think that bank system is generally the best one, meaning it's them who provide the most part of the suspicious activity reports. And in general, they are trying to comply to the rules and money laundering rules. So you can find troubles in little places, in little banks. You can find a single man inside the bank who may be accomplice to money laundering or taxation, but basically it's not there where we focus our attention, because in the last 20 years the system has changed. Maybe when we started this job, myself, it was harder to get information from banks. Now it's quite smooth. It's quite smooth procedure in Italy, at least.
Thank you. Roel?
Well, we are not so happy with our banks in the Netherlands. The three big banks we have, ING, Rabo, and ABN AMRO, are or were all under criminal investigation because their compliance policy was not at the required level. They're not an accomplice in money laundering, but because they could not identify enough the suspicious transactions which went through the bank, that led to the fact that the reporting to the FIU was not as good as it should be. And that's why we really prosecuted ING for not reporting enough to FIU and to commit money laundering because of negligence. Not because of intent, but because of negligence. And ING paid a penalty in the end of 750 million euros for that. ABN AMRO and Rabo are still under investigation. And well, the result of all this is that now the compliance departments of all three banks are much more bigger. And I hope at least that they're now reporting much more to the FIU than they did before. So we were not so happy with our banks in the past, but we hope they will improve for the future.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that now I'd like to take a moment and shift to our second part, thinking about tax crimes and corruption, and where we see that intersection and interplay. And I think I'd start us off by asking, how do you see professionals becoming involved in tax crimes and corrupt practices together? So how do those two criminal phenomena sort of interact with each other? What might be some examples? And it could be tax crime to facilitate corruption, corruption to facilitate tax crime. It can go either way. So I just invite you to sort of offer some observations about how you've seen that. Vasilios?
Yes, well, the main issue on that is, of course, corruption with due to tax authorities, with due to tax officials. And I have a rather amusing case from Greece of the previous decades. It was discovered somehow that many firms were seated in a very, very small place where only one public servant was a tax official there. So, in fact, he either had no time to check everybody there, or some of the firms had already personal contact to him. And so he could perform the so-called regular audits, the tax official, and all these kind of audits would end up to a positive result for the firm. And so this is a way, let's say, to make a quasi offshore system in your own country. Of course, this was located after a while, and larger tax control places were imposed in general. But this is just an example on how personal relations between tax authorities and, of course, the firms may arise that this also lead to corruption, and this is the case in smaller places.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any examples or observations they Bern? Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's many examples in terms of corruptions within tax administrations, tax officers asking for bribes to make things disappear, taxpayers approaching tax officials to, be kind in terms of the audits. But then again, in South Africa, we have the example of state capture where the commissioner of the Revenue Service, before he was even appointed, 5 years before he was appointed, he was approached by one of your big consulting companies, Bain Consulting, and they knew that he will be appointed in future as the new commissioner. And then the working model that they used to, redevelop the Revenue Service was designed to not be effective. So the effect of that one action that was done by means of a, big corporate, which are supposed to be clean, and with the facilitation, of course, by the one individual, you ended up with a Revenue Service that was really powerless in terms of going out after tax evaders. High-profile taxpayers were sort of left out of their scope because of the way that corrupt activity has basically captured the administration. So I think in terms of South African experience, those are pretty much the ones I want to share.
Thank you. I'm going to actually pause this for a moment and shift gears just because I wanted to give Simon a chance to make a comment before he departs. And it's a little ahead of place, but Simon, if you could just step in now, and then we'll return Rudolph and Sergio to you next.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Yeah, I've got to leave in a couple of minutes, so thanks for that. And I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about the organised crime side of tax, because it's so important for us in the UK, and I think it probably is in many other places in the world. HMRC's fraud investigation services, the 5,000 people I talked about earlier, about half of that is probably focused on organised crime, organised tax crime, and that takes many forms. It can be complex VAT or carousel fraud that we heard about earlier, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Similar sort of methodology on things like payroll frauds, where people go missing and whole payrolls don't get, the deductions don't get paid across. Also more traditional things where people are evading duty, so smuggling of various different products and different sort of ways. And organised criminals are heavily involved in all of those. And indeed anything where they can see they can make a quick buck and target the tax system and that side of things. So let me just pause on the carousel fraud, because I think it's a really interesting example, and someone asked a question about it earlier. And I'm sorry to say, I think the UK probably exported this to much of Europe. I think we were one of the first countries to be targeted on this. And back in the mid-2000s, we were losing at least £4 billion a year to carousel fraud. That was real money that was being ripped out of the tax system and usually disappearing overseas somewhere immediately, never to be found. But that is something that HMRC eventually got on top of, but it didn't get on top of it by just criminally investigating people and trying to put them in prison. They did do that to lots of people, but it was more about changing various parts of the VAT code. It was about changing the way we processed repayments, a whole range of different things, and it had to be what we would call a whole system approach to really prevent that happening. So very interesting area, and I've got a case example just quickly in a moment. In terms of the tax professional side of it, because this is organized crime, you're unlikely to get sort of normal tax professionals involved in this, because they've got to know who they're dealing with, and it'll be really difficult. So what I think we saw is organized crime groups either developing the expertise themselves. So on something like carousel fraud, it's a specific sort of MO that they're using, and they get that knowledge of the tax system, how it works, and then just implement that over and over again. Or they've got in-house advisors, and there's a good case where various parts of it in the public domain, and most recently it was the conviction. Sorry, not the conviction. It was the repatriation of someone who'd been convicted years ago and had been on the run for, I think, 9 years. A lady called Sarah Panitska, who was the sort of money launderer, company creator, financial expert of an organized crime group headed by a family called the Johnsons in the UK, who were convicted of VAT frauds of over £100 million. So again, that was an example of where they had their own in-house person. She specialized in all that, but she wasn't, in business as a tax advisor or an accountant and helping others as well. So I guess that's what I would say we typically saw. So either develop the expertise themselves or hire someone who's got that knowledge and then become part of that organized crime group.
Thank you very much, Simon, for offering us a view, particularly with a lens from the UK. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much.
All right, turning back our brains for a moment just to focus on corruption and tax crime for just a few more minutes before we bring our whole group into organized crime and tax. Rudolph, I'll turn to you next.
I can talk about my case, and I think it's corruption and taxes. It's a kind of moral corruption. I will consider that in the state of Zurich, because the people are educated at the same university, know each other, and so on. And when I came up with my case, actually, the tax authorities of Zurich, I found out of internal documents, in my case, they said I do perform defamation with Julius Baer. This is the tax authorities who said I defamed Julius Baer, and this, which was not my idea to do. I just want to bring the facts up to them and to get their support. And there is another issue. We do have so-called tax agreements, which are made between the bank or between a company and the tax authorities. I work for the Noble Group of China, and we had the tax agreement with the state of Zurich. The state of Zurich basically meant that a little bit of profit we make in the Bahamas, but the big profit we make in the Bahamas, and in the small profit in Switzerland. The reason was that we do have jobs for people here, and we create jobs, and that's it. But the real profit went up to the Bahamas. And that was made in a tax agreement. And they agreed it. It was one of the key main lawyers firm in the state of Zurich. So basically what I'm saying, the interest of the financial center of Zurich is, first of all, the state of Zurich, and then they use call it moral corruption to gain jobs, to make the environment better in Switzerland, but first of all in Zurich, in the state of Zurich. And when I had this issue with the federal tax authorities, they were really fed up with what the state of Zurich did about my case, not investigating the matter. So I'm talking about moral corruption here related to taxes, and it was a big amount. The state of Zurich could have meant easily $100 million from Julius Baer about Cayman structure, only the bank.
Thank you. Sergio.
Yes. Well, of course, also in Italy, unfortunately, we have several examples of corruptions related to the tax areas. Right, next week I will attend an appeal trial against the police officers a Guardia di Finanza officer who took bribes during the course of an investigation, an EPO investigation. But I can't see them as I can see these single episodes as a system. So I cannot see a general problem of tax auditors, tax agencies being corrupted by perpetrators, offenders, and taxpayers. So I cannot argument a lot about it. What I would like to do is to change the perspective about the relations between the two topics, meaning that if you commit corruption, at first there is more or less always a kind of tax offenses. There was a wise colleague of mine who used to say that behind every bribe there is a false invoices, and it is true, it's correct, because you cannot pay always. Of course, I'm talking about a big amount of money. You cannot use cash for everything. You need contracts, you need bank transfers, and you need false invoices. So if you have corruption, it's likely that you have also tax evasion before. Then you have to question if you are allowed to prosecute for both crimes, tax evasion and corruption, when the proceeds of tax evasion is used also for corruption. But this is a matter of law that I think it's different among different countries.
Thank you. Hassan? Hassan, you're unmuted.
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay. Well, talking about the nexus between corruption and tax crime, I would like to refer to a case that is called the Azerbaijani laundromat case. And this scandal involved a network of shell companies which were created by gatekeepers like lawyers, accountants, and were used to embezzle public funds out of Azerbaijan and pay bribes in multiple jurisdictions. Large private purchases were made on behalf of influential people having ties with Azerbaijan. Limited liability companies or limited liability partnerships, which we call LLPs, were also created by gatekeepers. And those LLPs were surprisingly, two of those LLPs were surprisingly owned by a taxi driver who lived in the capital of Azerbaijan. Secretive jurisdictions or offshore tax havens like British Virgin Islands, Seychelles, Belize were used to hide the source of fund and to avoid taxes. That's me.
Thank you. Enrique, you had your hand up before. Did you want to comment?
I was just going to say the same thing that Sergio just said, the use of fake invoices to pay bribes, and that those fake invoices can and will be used to deduct the amount of tax due. So yeah, if you're paying corruption, you're going to find tax evasion.
Diane, you're muted.
Thank you, Costa. Too focused. I thought I'd ask the following question to kind of bridge our shift from thinking about corruption into talking about organized crime in the last portion of our time. When criminal organizations use corruption, to approach authorities with tax professionals, what do we see in terms of the professionals helping them get protection from prosecution? So that is, if you've engaged in corruption, perhaps tax crimes, do we also see, particularly in the case of organized crime, sort of trying to use the tax professionals as a buffer to get some protection to help them avoid prosecution? So curious whether or not you have any thoughts about that.
Can I speak? Okay.
Oh, please do. Yes,
for
please.
big firms that in Brazil, for big firms that can happen, we can, and we normally prosecute only the accountants or the lawyers maybe, and not the CEOs. But for smaller firms, we almost always prosecute only the CEOs and not the accountants. It's the way around. So when you have like this big structure, it's really hard to really find who decided to do the tax evasion or the crime. But in smaller firms where this is easier to say that what person actually decided, you just go for the CEO and the courts usually convict.
All right. So I think I'm going to kind of come back to that in a second with another part, but I do want to take a moment now because we're moving towards the end. And I want to get a few things out. So we've touched a little bit at different points so far, just because of the prominence of organized crime in tax crime, especially with money laundering. But just to maybe ask you a little bit how you have seen professionals become involved in tax crime as they're also assisting organized crime. We've touched upon it a little bit, but I really want to open it up for everybody to sort of, if you have any examples or cases that you might like to, identify for us in terms of the ways that the professionals have been involved in both tax crime and organized crime together. Vasilios?
Yes, thank you. Well, I have recently witnessed a case. It's an ongoing procedure in the second instance of a pharmaceutical company, and through an intermediary, allegedly they were making some for the tax authorities, it was tax evasion, and for the prosecutors, it was also combined with bribery, with active bribery. And what I have witnessed was that the accounting firm, the tax specialist, who was not one of the big ones in Athens, in Greece, they helped them make this intermediary of the pharmaceutical company establish a payment network from Greece to offshore jurisdictions. And the prosecution was, and is still ongoing, against him as collaborator of the active bribery as well as the money laundering. So it's seen, in fact, that when tax authorities and prosecutors do catch these tax specialists, then they usually press charges just like the charges that are pressed to the CEO of the company. So that's from my practice in the jurisprudence. That's my my opinion.
Thank you very much. Kalahero.
Yes, concerning what you asked about the involvement of professional in tax crimes and organized crime, I had very recently 2 cases. One we can talk about because is already on the prosecution phase. The trial will start soon. The other one is under investigation, but I can tell you some information about that. So we had in 2 different parts of southern Italy, where you have this strong traditional organized crime group like Cosa Nostra in Sicily or 'Ndrangheta in Calabria, we have these 2 traditional mafia families that were involved not only in traditional criminal activities like extortion, drug trafficking, but also in VAT evasion. So what happened? For example, in the first one, the local office, the anti-mafia office, dealt with mafia crimes that, as you know, in Italy is a specific crime association of mafia kind nature. And on the other side, they transferred to us, to HEPPO, where I'm working now on, the part of the case related to the same family involved in illegal import of oil from Africa to Italy, to Europe, and so on, with the aim to evade VAT. So in that case, it was necessary for this mafia family to use professional to create the structure, the company structure, to make the evasion, to realize concretely the evasion of VAT, creating the different scheme, society scheme, company scheme in Italy and in other European Union countries to justify the evasion of VAT. So in this case, you had a professional involved in a mafia case, but aimed for this specific group to VAT evasion, to a VAT crime, and this led to the arrest of 20 people, 30, 40 people on the mafia side, on the mafia case, and to the seizure, to the freezing order of almost 40 million euros for VAT evasion on the other side. In another case that is very similar but has a different object, in that case, the whole file was transferred to the office in charge for the VAT evasion, the HEP office, even if it was committed by 'Ndrangheta. 'Ndrangheta is the mafia family operating in Calabria. It's one of the strongest nowadays, because in that case, that family was just the only focus of the criminal activity was the illegal import of luxury cars from Germany to Italy in evasion of the VAT through a system that I want to explain you because it's very complicated. But also in that case, it was necessary the involvement of a professional, of accountant, of a person specialized in the creation of this structure and who had a clear knowledge of the tax system to commit the crimes that should lead to freezing orders in the future, because as I told you, the investigation is still ongoing. So in both cases show, in my opinion, demonstrate in my opinion, that for this kind of crimes, the organized, also the traditional organized criminal group needed the support of professionals.
Yes, I just want to add something to what my friend Calogero said. And even in Naples and in Campania, we have cases like that. One case was involved a very famous historical Camorra group. Usually Camorra is not one, just Cosa Nostra in Sicily. Camorras are a lot of organizations, but some of them are quite as old as Cosa Nostra. So one of these was involved in a huge VAT fraud scheme, who involved also some people from Calabria. We had a unique operation from Campania to Rome and to Calabria and to Sicily too, who was also coordinated by the Anti-Mafia National Directorate. And so in this VAT fraud scheme, we had some professionals involved in finding, for example, oil deposits, because the organization needed oil deposits to make it work, to make the VAT fraud scheme. And so we found them. And this shows that Camorra groups and mafia groups are not the same anymore. just like Roberto Premisi says in beautiful documentary by Emanuele Piano. They're entrepreneurs. They used to be criminals. Their fathers maybe they were criminals. When they were young, they were criminals. Nowadays, they are 60, they are 70s, and they don't kill anybody. They don't make an extortion. They have already money stored somewhere, and they have to invest. So money laundering is not a problem of cash. It's a problem of enterprises. It's a problem of companies. And that's where these professionals enter, and they have to be focused in our investigation.
Thank you. Emanuele? You're muted?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for mentioning our work, Dr. Scarfo. What we saw in our investigation, though, is that the professionals involved were not officially professionals. And by this, I mean people that know how to maneuver the financial system without being necessarily part of a company or being an accountant or being, in this specific case, the man we dealt with is an IT expert. He runs companies, he's got companies, throughout the world and everything, but officially he's not a financial consultant. But he clearly is knowledgeable, and he knows how to navigate the system, and he knows how to look for the right context, be they in banks, be they in financial consultants, be they who they may be, in terms of setting up the system that is then necessary to move money around. So, I mean, we're talking about a specific, in Italian we have a word which is faccendiere, which doesn't really mean anything because they're not officially a professional, but they are people who know how to pick and choose the pros when they need them. I think this is also, I'm not sure this is a peculiar figure for Italian organized crime, but it's definitely interesting that, you have professionals which are not per se professionals.
That's very interesting, sort of matchmakers. That's a little bit of space between organized crime and the sort of traditional professional.
Well, yeah, basically they're go-betweens. Let's put it this way.
Yeah. Well, and that actually brings me to what I was going to ask, sort of just as a last question here, which is when we actually do have professionals involved in tax offenses at the same time as being involved in activities that are carried out by criminal organizations, how does the presence of the criminal organization shape these relationships, shape what happens? Does it create a different dynamic, either with the professionals, with what the professionals do, with how the professionals engage with government? What might we see there? And maybe I'll just ask a slightly different way. When organized crime is your client and they're doing bad things, how does it look different than when other clients are doing bad things? Enrique?
I would say that in not answering the second question, I would say that when someone works in a criminal organization, like with the mafia or here the PCC, you have usually little leverage because the professionals just can die, and usually they do. So the sword of justice, in sort of speak, is blunt, and the reality of the criminal organization is stronger and sharper and quicker. So.
All right. Any last comments on that as we want to close?
Just quickly, because I've been told, and yes, that it's happened in personal experience, and like bankers, when they deal with cartels, are finding themselves with a gun pointed at their head, and and that's when, you know, it's that wake-up call that you realize that your client is not the ordinary Joe you've been dealing with, or you thought you were dealing with. So I think there's a moment of reckoning for all these professionals at one point when they actually are facing with organized crime groups, and whether they knew it beforehand or they didn't, or they ignored, or they chose to ignore. There is always a moment of reckoning, and this is very common for professionals involved in these activities. For example, and there was a case I was pointing to Enrique that dealt with Brazil, where one of these Italian professionals was actually kidnapped by the cartels and held for some time because they were waiting for money to be transferred. That money was supposed to arrive in Brazil, not the entire amount arrived, and they were just holding on to this person. And this guy was an Italian professional who thought he was dealing with, you know, just a transaction. But the moment you go to Brazil and you're held at gunpoint and kidnapped, then you realize that, you know, it's not exactly the same. And this is clearly very common for some professionals who find themselves to be, you know, involved in this sort of activities.
Thank you very much. Amate, we'll turn to you for the closing remark here.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to say, since we have so many distinguished and knowledgeable people, that if you want to share information about economic crime with media, please consider me. You can find me on mate@reporter.london. And I also work with the ICIJ in Washington. That's the Panama Papers people. We're more than happy to protect sources, and we are very happy to hear from people with information in complete confidence. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to take a moment now to just thank all of our panelists. It's been an incredibly informative and wonderful 4 hours. I deeply appreciate your time commitment because it was incredibly valuable to have such expertise from such a range of jurisdictions to really speak to this issue collectively. And I do think having a conversation together makes it infinitely more valuable. So thank you so much. Costa, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Diane, for moderating for more than 4 hours. And thank you for our panelists. You were fantastic. It was a fascinating event. A lot of very, very insightful comments. And we would like really to thank you all. And thank you also to Judge Grasso and all the members of the Judiciary Authority that are following us. Thank you. Bye-bye.